Hello and welcome to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Big nonprofit ideas for the other 95%. I'm your aptly named host. Oh, I'm glad you're with me. I'd be stricken with adaptive hypertrophy if I heard the thickening story of how you missed today's show. You're bored as brand ambassadors. Does your board know the basics of your brand? Do you? How many volumes in your story library, and how do you build your board's talent at sharing them? Roger Sametz is president and CEO of Sametz Blackstone Associates, a brand consultancy. On Tony's Take 2, a caution for your planned giving program, Part 2. We're sponsored by Generosity Series, hosting multi-charity 5K runs and walks. Roger Sametz is with me in the studio. He's the president and CEO of Sametz Blackstone Associates, Boston-based brand consultancy, integrating brand, editorial, and digital strategy with design and digital media. They work with academic, research, and cultural nonprofits, as well as corporations. Roger writes and speaks widely on brand building. He's at Sametz on Twitter, and his company is at Sametz, SAMETZ.com. Roger Sametz, welcome to the studio.
Hi, glad to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Why do we need board members to be brand ambassadors? Why important?
Well, a lot of board members sign up to be board members and give of their time and money and expertise, and they don't actually think they have to do more than that. But there's no marketing or development department in any nonprofit of any size that actually doesn't need help. And board members have networks. So to the extent that they can be out there and actually talking to their networks in productive ways, or opening the doors for the fundraising staff, or being an extension of the marketing staff, that's all to the good.
And what does it mean to be a brand ambassador?
Well, to be a brand ambassador means you have to sort of, first, sounds tautological, understand the brand, so that you can be out there and actually talk about the organization and what it means and what its vision is and how you might, convince other people to participate, donate, or even be another board member. And
this is something that can be trained? Since people don't come to the organization most likely with these skills, they can learn them.
Of course. Well, board members generally have, aptitude for learning things, or they might not be on boards. So sure. And a lot of the work we do with boards actually happens in a board meeting setting, or perhaps a retreat setting, or some sort of special meeting. Because if you come into a board and, you're the finance guy, or you're the lawyer who helps out, or you help out in, some particular aspect, going out and chatting may not be something that you're actually conversant in, or, have done.
How come we're not natural ambassadors, brand ambassadors? How does it just come naturally?
Well, I think
because we love the organization.
Well, part of it may be that some people, of course, are better at actually having conversations and drawing people out than others. But leaving that to one side, people come into organizations because they know some chunk of it. You come in because you care about the kids' education program.
The reason you came,
Or you care about, their hunger programs or something. But you may not know the full scope of an organization. You may only know the sort of bit that, touched you. So part of the education process is getting people up to speed on the whole of the organization, and then, coaching them like you would coach anyone to do anything, to be more comfortable.
All right. And to start this coaching training, we need to recognize that there's a gap between, I think, the way they perceive the organization and the way they'd like it to be perceived, or the way they describe it and the way they'd like the organization to be perceived. Help them see that there's some disconsonance there.
Sure. I mean, often leadership in an organization or the person charged with stewarding the board, is pretty clear that their board members are not really good ambassadors. And then there are plenty of board members who, when asked to go out and be ambassadors, sort of look at the clock or look at the floor or say, not my thing. But there's a sort of an easy exercise that one can actually do, and it's sort of fun. So take a board meeting, take 20 minutes of a board meeting, pass out a bunch of 4x6 index cards, and ask board members on one side, write down how you actually describe this organization to friends of yours at a cocktail party or a barbecue or something. And give them 7 minutes or whatever to do that. And then ask them on the other side of the index card to write down what they might like to see if the local newspaper were writing an article on the organization. So typically a newspaper will write, X organization, comma, a blank, comma. So, there are 3 or 4 words there that come after the name of the organization that are sort of pinned to it in the first paragraph of some article. So ask the board members, what would you like to see there? So the first side of the card is, how would you actually talk about this to some peer at a cocktail party? The second side is sort of this distillation, this aspirational take on how you'd like to actually have the organization described. So you do that, and the reason you actually are using index cards is so Tony, who's sitting next to Janice, can't say, what Janice said. So people have to commit to writing, and then you go around the room and you share what people have written on both sides of the cards, and 2 things, if history is our guide, will happen. You'll either end up with, or either or both, you'll end up with very disconnected descriptions of the organization. And as you go around the room, you'll start to get these looks like, oh my God, we really are not singing off the same page. And then when you get to the second side of the card, the aspirational side, you'll get these completely different visions. So just doing this exercise will make pretty clear to people that, hey, we could use some training.
It sounds very eye-opening, especially the aspirational side, the way you'd like the organization to be described. But in your experience, you see lots of disparate answers to those.
Well, you do. I mean, board members are recruited or they sign up, but they're not part of leadership. I mean, they're not sitting in the, CEO or executive director's office. So they may never have actually been in on the vision of the place. So there's some catch up to do.
Okay. And they need to become masters of the brand, the organization's brand. What are some elements of brand? This is a very ethereal thing that a lot of people regrettably reduce to logo and tagline or something. We know it goes a lot deeper than that. I've had guests on who have made that very clear. But what are some of these? What are some of the concepts around in brand that we're trying to grasp?
Okay, so if you think of brand not as the label on the toothpaste box, and certainly brand in the context of nonprofits is fairly recent, and there's still a fair amount of resistance around that because there will be many people who think it's too commercial. But if you think of brand not as, to your point, not as the logo, a logo is sort of a symbol of the brand. But if you think about it as what an organization means, what it promises, the expectations it sets, well, then that's a whole different way of looking at brand. So board members have to sort of understand that. But to sort of get to that, you have to sort of get under that hood. There are some sort of brand basics to go over. So we started a minute ago to talk about what does an organization mean. So you need to understand, okay, what's the organization's vision? They may not be clear on that. What are our areas of focus? Which means, if we're an anti-hunger organization, how are we actually, what are the areas in which we're working to accomplish eradicating hunger? What are the roles we play? You could be a convener. You could be, an inventor. You could be any number of things. But constituency out there are not going to remember 17 programs that you have. So you need to sort of boil this down into a finite number, 3, 5 areas of focus and roles that people can actually remember. And then the sort of more evocative side of this, what are the brand attributes that you want associated? So these are generally adjectives. So to take a commercial metaphor here, Volvo has always been associated with safety. Then they sort of managed the product and brand slightly differently, and they kept safety and added performance. So organizations tend to have attributes that they own that are already associated with them, and attributes that they would like to have associated with them, which we'll call aspirational. So if you work through these areas of focus, the mission and vision, the roles, and the attributes both owned and aspirational, you get a pretty good sense of the underpinnings of how an organization can be presented externally.
All right, we need to dive deeper into some of this because it sounds, it's very basic to the organization, its promise. What are the expectations? I know one you didn't mention, but I know it's part of it. How do you measure success? This is not something that, if it's not already clear, we're not going to be able to answer all these questions in a board meeting. Is strategic planning a part of this process?
Well, strategic planning certainly could be part of the process.
Okay.
But leadership also may know some of this, but the board may not know some of it. So you certainly could have sessions where you educate, or you could use the board to actually surface these by putting up big Post-its around the room and actually putting these topics down and writing down different suggestions and then sort of figuring out where you are.
Okay. We're going to go out for a break. And when we return, of course, Roger and I are going to keep talking about your board as brand ambassadors. Stay with us.
You're tuned to Nonprofit Radio. Tony Martignetti also hosts a podcast for the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Fundraising Fundamentals is a quick, 10-minute burst of fundraising insights published once a month. Tony's guests are expert in crowdfunding, mobile giving, event fundraising, direct mail, and donor cultivation. Really all the fundraising issues that make you wonder, am I doing this right? Is there a better way? There is. Find the Fundraising Fundamentals archive at TonyMartignetti.com. That's Martignetti. Remember, there's a G before the N. Thousands of listeners have subscribed on iTunes. You can also learn more at the Chronicle website, philanthropy.com. Fundraising Fundamentals, the better way.
Welcome back to Big Nonprofit Ideas for the Other 95%. Let's do some live listener love, and let's do it starting abroad. Tokyo, Japan, and multiple Tokyo, Japan, and Musashino in Japan. Konnichiwa. Seoul, South Korea. Always so loyal. Seoul. Unbelievable. Annyeonghaseyo to our listeners in Seoul. And in China, we've got Nanjing and Guangzhou. Konnichiwa. Live listener love here in the U.S. St. Louis, Missouri. Sioux Falls, South Dakota. San Francisco, California. New York, New York. Welcome, each of you. And of course, podcast pleasantries to those listening wherever you are, at whatever time, on whatever device. Pleasantries to the podcast listeners, over 10,000 of you, and to our affiliates, affiliate affection. Love each of you. Lots of alliterations on Nonprofit Radio, an abundance of them. I like alliterations. Roger, yesterday I was speaking at a presentation. I did a presentation on hosting a panel, and I met a board member for who's on the Big Apple Circus board. I don't know if you're familiar with Big Apple Circus. They
Sure.
come up a lot to New York. And one of the things she lamented is that they're not too well known. But I think she was an excellent brand ambassador because within a minute, she had me understanding how, first reminding me that it is a nonprofit, which a lot of people don't know, but that they use clowning techniques to help children in a bereavement program that they have, and also clown techniques in education and some of the outreach in the school programs that they have. And she ticked off like 3 or 4 things within a minute or a minute and a half that I had no idea Big Apple Circus did. And I complimented her on being an outstanding an outstanding brand ambassador. That was Ginny Kime. Virginia Chambers Kime, but Ginny Kime is what she goes by. I was really struck to meet what I thought was a real good brand ambassador, board member.
Well, it seems like she was pretty clear on, as we were talking about before the break, the organization's roles, its areas of focus. She made it clear to you, that it was a nonprofit, which could have been ambiguous, and she clearly engaged you. So whether she comes by this naturally or has been soaking in it or had some training, you probably don't know, but that is what we're aiming for.
I urged her, I told her that if her fellow board members are not as good ambassadors as she, that she should listen to this exact show because you were coming on the next day. It was just yesterday. Now some of these basics that we were just talking about, seems to me that the organization should already know all the stuff that you mentioned, mission, values, expectations, who are the constituents. These should already be known factors.
Leadership certainly should know all of that, but sometimes they actually get a little bit down in the weeds. So if you're an organization that has 17 different programs, or you're an academic research organization that has 17 different labs or whatever, people often sort of stay at that program level and don't actually think about how can we group these into, sort of higher level categories or buckets that people can more easily understand because they're so focused on, keeping the ship going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So sometimes they don't think about that. And also there's, we've determined over the years, people within nonprofits see their value as self-evident. I work here, I believe in it, you should believe in it too. And they don't quite understand that it actually takes more work to get someone who's only connected tangentially or not connected at all to understand it. So there's work to do to move from that sort of internal viewpoint to being externally focused, which you need to do if you're trying to, get more donors or increase your participation or, whatever with people who are not in the fold.
How do you find boards take to this work? Are they enthusiastic about the idea that we're going to be talking about brand and being an ambassador, or however it's described to them? How do they take to it?
We've always found that people were actually quite thankful because they're nervous. They know that part of their role is to be ambassadors, but yet they don't really know how to ambassad or whatever the verb might be.
Ambassadorize.
Yeah. So, any sort of help that gets them into a position of, both comfort and sort of fluency so that it feels natural and they're not nervous about it, that's great. And a lot of the exercises that we sort of put together, they're helped by wine, they're helped by camaraderie.
A little fluid.
Sure. So you can make these exercises fun, and to the extent that they actually build fluency within a specific person, they're also building deeper engagement of your board across all the members.
Do you find red or white wine is a better beverage to accompany this? And then
I think people could choose.
Either one is you're agnostic to.
I'm totally agnostic.
Okay. How? Let's see. When organizations are coming to you for help in this area, so what kind of symptoms are they showing? How do they know they have a problem?
Well, we talked about that index card exercise before the break, which is sort of a diagnostic tool. But I think organizations can simply know they need some more help from their board members. I mean, any nonprofit board needs their board to help open doors for fundraising. Mm-hmm. And that's only going to happen if the board member is, comfortable and fluent and can, understand enough to actually make that happen.
Okay. And so is it usually the case that the organizations do recognize themselves that they've got some shortcomings around their board's participation in fundraising?
Sure. And or it's just a good idea.
Okay. And do you describe when you're about to come to the board, do you describe it as we're gonna help you, coach you to be good ambassadors?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no reason to hide around this.
Yeah,
like I said,
I
people,
nothing to be ashamed of. I was just wondering.
No,
Okay.
they're generally up for it.
Okay, all right, they're up for the help, as you described. Okay, so let's talk a little more about some of the basics of the brand. There's some more elements to it that we haven't talked about, like who do we serve, what do we focus on, what are some other basics?
So almost any nonprofit is going to have a range of constituencies. So, we've been talking about donors. Donors are one constituency. People who actually take advantage of your services and offerings, that's another constituency. You may have partners. You may have government agencies. You may have, people you're trying to recruit as staff. So all of these people have slightly different needs about what they need to know about your organization in order to sort of connect in ways that make sense for them. So you need to identify constituencies and what they care about so that you can sort of rearrange things in ways that make sense for them. I mean, you would do the same thing in planning a website.
You named one very interesting, potential employees, people who you're hoping to recruit to the organization. A brand ambassador board member could easily be talking to the next CFO or any person at any level.
Absolutely. And, given that nonprofits generally pay less than profit organizations, you have to want to be there. So to the extent that the brand is another reason to want to work for that organization, that's all to the good. But you have to understand that in order for that to be, a magnet.
Our next step, once have we exhausted all the basics of the brand before we go to the next step?
I think we have. I think if we understand, areas of focus and roles and The only thing we didn't talk about was sort of category, which sounds a little odd, but sometimes boards have a hard time articulating, well, what exactly are you? Are you an anti-hunger organization or are you a social services organization?
Oh, really?
For instance.
You find that?
We often find that. And so that sort of stymies people at that first level of conversation if they can't even clearly say, what category of the organization is. So it sounds simple enough, but when you sort of put it to the test, it isn't that simple, and often it actually takes some work to both evolve and then subsequently get agreement on.
Interesting. So there actually, it's to get agreement on. So there's differing opinion as to whether we're social service or community based or however we're defining ourselves. You're getting different opinions around that.
You will get different opinions, and you'll get different language, even around the same opinion.
Huh? Can you share any chance you can recollect
we're working with one organization at the moment that's a nonprofit that actually helps nonprofits, and part of the organization thinks they're in the capacity building business, which is probably accurate but not particularly mellifluous to talk about. And part of the organization thinks they're in the business of shifting power and influence to change values in society. These are two very different ideas.
Yeah.
Now, they actually do both, but if you're out there talking about it and you pick one or the other, you'll get a very different picture.
And how does the process mediate these different opinions?
Well, this would actually happen at a leadership level and not a board level. One would have the chats, and we do have the chats with senior leadership to sort of nail this.
All right. This is very esoteric stuff you're dealing with. This brand.
Well, yeah, it's always interesting, and there's a lot more to it than the starburst on the side of the toothpaste box.
Yeah. All right. We once all the board members are comfortable with the brand basics, then we're going to help them put together an elevator speech, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Everybody wants one.
This is a couple minutes, basically what I heard about the Big Apple Circus from Ginny Kime.
Well, everyone, elevator speech is just shorthand for what's your high-level message.
Mm-hmm.
But implied in this is the notion of being able to have everybody on the same page. So one template that you can use actually comes from a game that some people may have played earlier in life called Mad Libs, which was, if you remember, there was sort of a story on a pad and there were blanks, and you were asked to fill in a noun or a verb or an adverb. And then when the story got read back, some level of hilarity ensued because the words didn't make any sense. So when you do this on a brand-focused level, you're actually looking for more specific things. So the template runs something like, and we'll try to draw this in radio air.
Yeah, okay.
For whatever constituency. So if you're an arts organization, it could be arts-interested public, it could be prospective donors, it could be artists. For X constituency, your organization is what? So that's where you get that sort of category answer. And you provide another blank. What do you provide? And then how do you actually provide it? And then what value do you deliver? And how is the organization worthy of participation? And how is it worthy of support? So these are all blanks. So again, it's an exercise with big sort of Post-its up around the room, and you put lots of different answers in. And then the board together sort of culls, okay, what are the best responses here? And then you start to sort of string it together along with adjectives that actually could come from your brand attributes. So an example might be, we'll take, for example, WGBH, which is a public television station, radio station in Boston that we work with. So the big category answer might be public media powerhouse or content engine, which are both a lot more evocative than television and radio stations. The second part of that might be trusted guide to new worlds and new ideas.
It's what the organization is.
Yes, of course. So it's a more evocative answer than a literal answer.
Yeah.
But hey, you're out being ambassadors, so you can certainly be evocative.
Right. We're not trying to define. This is not a definition. This is not a dictionary process.
And it's not a tax form.
Okay.
In terms of areas, well, they're in news and drama, they're in public affairs, they're in kids programming, they're in science. So you get to nail the sort of areas of focus. They have signature programs like Masterpiece. Everybody knows Downton. And what do they provide? They provide opportunities for exploration and interaction and an independent voice, especially if you're talking about the news and public affairs programming. Where do they do this? Well, it's locally the Boston area, but now that everything streams, it's much farther. And of course, it's multi-platform. So there's a more complicated answer to where than there might have been in years past.
Yeah.
And then you can end with, it's for you and supported by you. Or you could take another completely different example. I referenced a anti-hunger organization a little while ago. So the constituency might be, for those who care about, in this case we're talking about Massachusetts, the 700,000 people in Massachusetts who actually don't know where their next meal is coming from. So that's the constituency, the people who care about that. And then Project Bread, what's the category? The leading statewide anti-hunger organization. And what do? Offer fresh approaches to ending hunger. Well, what are they? By pioneering, funding, facilitating a range of programs, and through education and advocacy, they actually have programs that meet people where they are, rather than just handing food out of the back of a truck. And then you get into that next level of details. Well, how do they actually do this? So it's programs that are in the community, programs that are in schools with kids, programs that are building sustainable food ecosystem. So then you get into more detail. And then what's the benefit? Well, it's all to sort of fulfill a vision that the opposite of hungry isn't just full, it's healthy, which then positions the organization differently against sort of just emergency food.
Yeah, nutrition versus full nutrition versus food.
And then you bring it down to donors, which is with the support of people. They also sponsor a large hunger walk. Those who walk and our corporate partners were able to eradicate hunger in the state.
All right, two excellent examples. A little long, but I think the examples help us to fill in the template. Okay, we're going to give Roger. I'm going to give you a break for a couple minutes, and there's going to be more with Roger coming up, talking about brand ambassadors and Tony's Take Two, of course, before that. But I have to mention Generosity Series because they sponsor the show. They help you raise money, you being small and mid-sized nonprofits. That's their sweet spot, by hosting multi-charity 5K runs and walks. Lots of groups that couldn't sponsor something on their own come together, and you can have a terrific day. In New York City, 12 charities came together, raised over $150,000. In the last one in Philadelphia, 9 charities raised over $75,000. I know because I MC a bunch of their events for them, and I'm the one announcing the fundraising totals at the end of the day. So it's a fun day. It's a successful day around fundraising, and that's what Generosity Series provides. That's them. They're coming up in northern New Jersey, Miami, Florida, and New York City. Pick up the phone, talk to Dave Lynn. He's the COO. Be sure and tell him you're from Nonprofit Radio. 718-506-9777 or generosityseries.com. My video this week, which is from my laundry room, is a follow-up to last week's caution for your planned giving program. It's the story of a $12 million lawsuit against Chapman University by a 98-year-old donor who became discontented with the organization. You have to be careful with the relationships that you build and how close you get to someone. And the whole story is in the video, which is at TonyMartignetti.com. And that is Tony's Take Two for Friday, 20th of March, 11th show of 2015. Roger Sametz, feeling a little under the weather, but he's mustering well. If you hear silence, that's us cutting Roger's mic so that we can give him a cough. But he's made the trip down from Boston. Thank you for doing that.
It's been a tough Boston winter, as most of your listeners probably already know.
We do, and it's not been much better here. Today's the first day of spring, I believe, March 20th, and it's snowing outside. If we look out the window right now, there's pretty brisk snow coming down in New York City. All right. Anything more you want to add? We don't need another example, but anything more you want to add about this template that helps with the elevator speech?
Well, I think it does two things. I mean, you actually end up with an elevator speech. It's not going to be eloquent language by putting things up in this Mad Libs Post-it format, but it will give you the content. So then, either some subcommittee of the board or staff can then be charged with actually, wordsmithing it so everybody likes it.
Okay.
But getting the content down is important. And then the other thing it does, of course, which all of these exercises do, is get board members engaged. So to the extent that people sitting around a board table or wherever you're sitting and doing this are participating in developing messages, it's already getting into their heads. So you stand a much better chance of people becoming comfortable with something if they've had a part in evolving it, much more so than if you just took, a piece of paper and slid it across the table.
Yeah, foist it on them and say, memorize this, and have it prepared for the next meeting.
Yes, quite.
Okay, all right. So they're involved in the creation of it. This is going to this is one of the tools that we're empowering board members with. Basically, I mean, this is what we're trying to make comfortable, confident brand ambassadors. And another tool that you recommend is stories.
Yes, well, board members can, like anybody, can sort of talk about an organization either from the top down or the bottom up. So the top down would be starting with your elevator speech, and then presumably if you haven't run to get another ice cube, the person you're talking to, you might tell a story. Another board member might swivel around at a bar stool and actually just start with a story and end up with the elevator speech. So a bottom-up approach.
Okay.
But this only really works if people have the stories, one way or the other. And what happens is board members, because they've experienced the organization themselves in one way or another, they might have a story. But they might have only that one story, and the other board members would have different stories. So to the extent that you can sort of pool these stories and even get a story library going, perhaps online, internally online, then people have more things that they can talk to, and they can sort of pivot. But if you want to sort of think about a story, there's, of course, another template to try to actually do that. And you can sort of start by thinking, okay, if this were a movie title, what would be the name of the movie? And that leads you immediately to some sort of evocative top end to the story. And then, of course, you want to talk about, well, who's in the story? Who's the protagonist? Yeah. So this could be a person or it could be an organization. Then the next step to think about is, okay, so what's the problem? What has to get solved? And then where does your organization come in? So what programs or services get marshaled to help solve that problem? And then what's the end of the story? And is the ending, finite, or is the benefit ongoing? So you can use that very simple template and really think about, okay, how does your organization, participate in either other organizations or other people's lives to make a difference?
Where else might these stories emanate from? Your example was board members. Maybe each person has a story or something, but they can also filter up from the program staff that's out actually doing the work. So I know a lot of organizations like to invite people who are benefiting from the work, the people that the organization is serving, have them come to board meetings and tell their story.
Sure, you could absolutely do that. What you're going for is something that's authentic, where you can, show that you made a difference, and that you're not sort of, overreaching. You're not trying to say you made, more of a difference than people would believe.
Yeah.
But sure, I mean, every organization writes up profiles or highlights people. Those are generally stories, whether they're set up as stories that have sort of a, beginning, middle, and an end that has a benefit, that varies. But what you are going to make sure that you have it, you have an impact statement at the end, you have a benefit to show that, why people should participate or why people should be donors, and just, give them a reason to believe.
We got to get these stories down to under 2 minutes, right? If I'm in a conversation with somebody at a reception or something, I can't hold their interest too long unless I'm a master storyteller.
Well, you might be, but yes, I think you're right. Under 2 minutes, or if you're writing it out, under 200 words.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And you mentioned a story library, like internally online. What is that?
Well, you can do a story library in any number of ways, but if your organization has some sort of internal web setup, that's a great place to post them. I mean, if it doesn't have that, you can just compile them. But the whole idea is you don't want stories to just live in individuals' heads if they're really good and they can be shared, and people can use them in conversation out there in the world.
Oh, you might even be sharing them on the web with the public. Doesn't have to be behind in an intranet or anything.
No, a lot of what we've been talking about, because we've been talking in the board ambassador context, is useful for board ambassadors. But of course, it's useful for staff. It's useful for senior leadership.
Yeah, potential donors.
Absolutely.
I mean, these stories are there's quite a bit of talk among nonprofits around storytelling.
Right, and as I said earlier, storytelling is simply sort of the inductive way of describing your organization as opposed to starting from the top down, which is sort of more the deductive way. But both are valid, and it has to do with how you're comfortable talking with people.
Okay. What's our next tool that we want to arm our board members with in making them confident?
Well, we started to talk about donors, so let's focus on that for a minute. So most organizations, because they do more than one thing, are not monolithic. And as we already discussed, their constituencies are not monolithic either, even within a donor community. And if you think about major donors for the moment, they're just not good doobies. They're generally interested in giving money to some organization that they believe will advance goals that they personally care about. So if you take the goal around major giving to be connecting institutional priorities with donor passions and interests, and you understand that the people aren't monolithic and the organization's not monolithic, then it behooves you to come up with different ways that people can connect. So this is another way that you can actually work with your board to evolve what we call ways in. So for instance, take an orchestra. It could be a tiny little orchestra or a really big orchestra. Some people are going to care about performing the traditional repertoire. Some people are going to care about commissioning new music, probably a smaller number. Some people are going to care about the space that the music gets performed in and what shape that's in. Some people are going to care about kids' education programs, if there are such. Some people are going to care about building the audiences of the next generation. And the answer to that is yes. So some donors will connect in one way and some donors will connect in another. But it's important that for your nonprofit that you actually evolve what these different ways in are, so that if I'm, for instance, am going out to talk to Tony and I think he wants to support kids' education, but he really wants to support community outreach, I'm able to actually pivot and talk to you about community outreach. Of course, implicit in all of this, and we could have talked about this at the top of the hour, is the need to listen. Because if you're going to have any conversation with someone outside your organization, you have to also understand where they are. Otherwise, you're just pushing things at them.
Yeah, you're a billboard.
And so you want it to be a conversation. So you have to learn enough about the person you're talking to actually take what you've learned in terms of these areas of focus and roles and stories and mission and category, and talk to the person in terms that are meaningful to that person.
You like to rehearse this with boards once you've armed them with the tools? Is there some practice?
We do a lot of role playing, which is also fun and also better served with wine.
Okay.
So you can set up small groups.
There's not much that isn't helped by wine, I find. My favorite is Sauvignon Blanc, personally.
Well, it depends whether your board meetings are in the evening or at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah, well, Bloody Marys are a possibility.
I have not tried that.
All right, but if they're evening, most activities in life I find very easy, well lubricated by wine.
Well, you have an Italian last name.
I do.
But yes, a lot of these can be when after you evolve the kinds of things we've been talking about, whether it's in small groups or people making presentations to the larger group, anything that has people actually use what we're talking about rather than just sort of take it in. Because the more people use the information that we've been discussing, the more comfortable they'll get and the more it's actually in their heads and they make it their own. So never are we asking anyone to memorize words or spew things back. It's all about understanding the content and the concepts and then being able to actually talk about it in words that are comfortable.
In your own, right.
Yeah, in your own, that connect with the person that you're actually talking with.
How long is this process to build the board ambassadors, brand ambassadors?
Well, these are separate, different kinds of exercises that we've been talking about, and there's no, fixed timeline or sequence to any of this. You could certainly come up with, 3 or 4 of these workshops, depending on how often you want to meet. So it may be better to do one a quarter, just because the board has other things to do, and you have to hijack some time here. Or you could do a concentrated session if you had, a 2-day retreat, and you'd, take some of that time.
Okay. The ways in. I mean, they should be already known to the organization. There shouldn't be anything new here in terms of identifying how you can be supportive.
Well, there's always a difference between things that exist and actually sort of understanding it and remembering it. So if you, for instance, let's take a life sciences organization example. You may care about the work they're doing in a specific disease area. I may care about how they're using new technology. Somebody else may care about how they're training scientists of the next generation. So you may know that the organization is actually doing those things, but you really care about that disease area that you care about. So in order for you to feel comfortable talking about the technologies that I care about, you do have to learn more about it and sort of, soak in it a little bit.
All right. Yeah. So, right. Again, everybody's got their own perspective and reason that they're with the organization.
Exactly.
We need to share all these so that everybody's conversant in all the ways.
Right. Because the goal of an ambassador is to be able to meet people where they are, not to just go out, as you said earlier, and be a billboard that, is inflexible and, unless it's an electronic billboard, isn't going to change any. So you need the information, the confidence, the fluency, and of course the content, which is largely what we've been talking about during this hour, to start someplace and be able to pivot to someplace else, and not be flustered in the middle.
You also work with board members to overcome potential resistance points as they're out ambassadorizing.
Sure. Well, everything doesn't go smoothly. We've been talking about ways to make board members more comfortable. That doesn't mean you're not going to bump up against some, donor prospect that just, says no, or I don't believe in you, or comes up with, some reason why, he or she should not entertain a conversation with you. So there's no guarantee it's all going to just, fall into your lap.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we keep coming back to role playing and these group sessions, but the leadership or board or the fundraising staff probably knows the points of resistance. So one thing the board can do is come up with what the arguments are for dispelling that. So this is a good thing to do in small groups. You could even sort of picture seeing a couple of people on one side of a table and a couple of people on the other, and one side has the resistance and the other side has to, with what we've just been talking about, the roles and areas of focus and the impact stories, try to convince the first party, no, you're wrong, or give it another thought, so that you can in fact bring some more people into the fold.
Okay. Before we move on, anything more we can talk about with respect to these resistance points? Anything else there?
Well, they're different for every organization. We worked and some are
tell a story. Tell somebody you worked with.
Yeah, some are harder to overcome than others.
Okay. I like stories.
So for a large ballet company that we worked with, one of the points of resistance that we heard often was, I fall asleep. Kind of hard to figure out what the argument for that might be, other than take a nap earlier.
Well, the person's a Philistine.
Or whatever, or,
Write them off. Wouldn't we just write them off? I fall asleep at the ballet, or I fall asleep at the opera. Are we really going to get anywhere?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Well, some of these you don't get anywhere.
Okay.
Or, there aren't any words, or I don't get the story. Or for modern ballet where there isn't a story, I really don't get the story. So you have to explain, you probably have to actually sort of inculcate people about what they're actually seeing and hearing. But there are some things that, yes, it's harder to overcome. Some things are easier to overcome. So going back to WGBH, the PBS station in Boston, one of the things they depend on...
Before you tell the GBH story, we're going to go out for a couple minutes.
Okay.
Give your voice a break. And we'll come back and we'll go right to the GBH story. Stay with us.
Like what you're hearing on Nonprofit Radio? Tony's got more. On YouTube, you'll find clips from his stand-up comedy, TV spots, and exclusive interviews. Catch guests like Seth Godin, Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist, Mark Echo of Echo Enterprises, Charles Best from DonorsChoose.org, Aria Finger of DoSomething.org, and Naomi Levine from New York University's Hyman Center on Philanthropy. Tony tweets, too. He finds the best content from the most knowledgeable and interesting people in and around nonprofits to share on his stream. If you have valuable info, he wants to retweet you. During the show, you can join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag #NonprofitRadio. Twitter is an easy way to reach Tony. He's at Tony Martignetti, Martignetti. Remember, there's a G before the N. He hosts a podcast for the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Fundraising Fundamentals is a short, monthly show devoted to getting you over your fundraising hurdles. Just like Nonprofit Radio, Tony talks to leading thinkers, experts, and cool people with great ideas. As one fan said, Tony picks their brains and I don't have to leave my office. Fundraising Fundamentals was recently dubbed the most helpful nonprofit podcast you have ever heard. You can also join the conversation on Facebook, where you can ask questions before or after the show. The guests are there too. Get insider show alerts by email. Tony tells you who's on each week and always includes links so that you can contact guests directly. To sign up, visit the Facebook page or TonyMartignetti.com.
I'm Peter Shankman, author of Zombie Loyalists, and you're listening to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Big nonprofit ideas for the other 95%.
Welcome back again to Big Nonprofit Ideas for the Other 95%, as Peter Shankman just said. More live listener love. More live listeners have joined us. Woodbridge, New Jersey, East Bridgewater, Massachusetts, and Brooklyn and Queens, New York. Welcome. Live listener love to each of you. Cholet, France. Bonsoir. We got Chennai, India, somewhere in the UK. UK, unfortunately, you're masked. We can't tell where, but we'll presume it's England. But live listener love to India and the UK listeners also. And also joining us, Moscow and Canoas, Brazil. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, but you know who you are listening in Brazil. We've also got Italy, but we can't see where you are. We don't know what city or town. I've been to Italy 4 times, so I should be able to say hello in, what am I missing? Ciao. What am I missing? Ciao, come stai? I can order a meal and I can find my way to hotels. That's about my, like, restaurant and hotel Italian is about what I speak.
You could start with buongiorno.
Buongiorno is very good. Thank you, Roger. And you don't even have the Italian name.
I don't.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's. So we were overcoming our resistance points. So anything, and you were going to tell a story about WGBH. Sorry, that's where we were. Yeah.
Well, it's not so much a story as, so it's a little different from some other nonprofits in that it depends not only on individual donors, it depends on sponsorship. So one goal of a particular board is actually to help with sponsorships. So many organizations, of course, do have sponsors, and sponsors require a slightly different value proposition than perhaps an individual or a major donor is going to have. So some of the areas of resistance were, because it's a public television station, for instance, I don't want to support you because you're too liberal. Okay? So then the board got together and came up with some arguments around that. Or doesn't Congress pay for everything? Well, no. But so that's a point of ignorance that you could then sort of overcome. Or isn't your audience too old? Well, it depends, too old for what, and it's also younger than you think. So there are things out there that are often misperceptions that board members will get hit with, or in fact staff will get hit with, that one can marshal arguments for. So yes, that's different than falling asleep at the ballet.
How does staff support this whole ambassadorizing process?
Well, in a lot of these organizations that we're working with, we are facilitating these sessions, but staff, of course, has to organize them and make them happen, and to our earlier point, probably procure the wine. But an interesting side effect of all of this, not the side effect of the wine, is how what comes out of these meetings then benefits staff. So they are learning right along with the board. So they will be clearer on the organization. They will be clearer on some of these arguments. They will be clear. They will learn new stories. So there's a definite, relationship between, staff and board. They're not just there in a supportive role. It's actually making their jobs, more successful at the same time.
Even though it's a board process, the staff is vicariously learning.
Right, and that's a goal, even though it was not necessarily sort of a stated goal. But we see it happen all the time. That you're sort of raising both sides of the seesaw in the course of doing these exercises.
Yeah. Okay. Then it's not a seesaw anymore. If both sides are rising, it's some kind of rising platform.
It's just a seesaw that's level.
A level seesaw. But then that's not really it's not really a seesaw if it doesn't have a fulcrum in the middle. So one side rises and the other side falls. But if both sides rise, I don't know. What's that? That's a jungle gym.
We'll find another metaphor.
Okay. So I'm beating you up, even though you don't feel well. Okay. We've covered the resistance points, and this sounds like something that would be valuable to revisit over time, not just do once and kind of put on a shelf.
Well, like brand building, which is also a process and not an event, all of these could be processes and not events. So to the extent that you take some of the exercises we've been talking about and structure them over some period of time, it also serves an organization well to bring these back at some kinds of different periods. First of all, boards change, so everybody isn't going to be always up to speed in equal ways.
Of course.
And this notion of fluency, like practicing anything else, piano, swimming, whatever, you have to do it. So you can certainly come up with short role-playing exercises at some other point. You can certainly revisit stories. You can revisit roles and areas of focus. All of this stuff could have a sort of rinse and repeat kind of cycle.
We talked earlier on about strategic planning, something formal possibly being a part of this. Do you find many organizations that really don't have the basics mastered so that they can carry on further?
Well, lots of organizations have the basics and not have a strategic plan, which is fine. You're not always in a strategic planning mode.
Yeah.
But if your organization does have a new strategic plan, all of this is even more important, because there's no strategic plan that we've bumped into that doesn't depend on its success by having people think and act in your favor. So all of what we're talking about on the board or the staff level is helping you to convince people to think and act in your favor. Otherwise, strategic plans just sit on a shelf.
Yeah.
They all depend on some actions.
Yeah, that's something I've had guests lament, that a strategic plan gets done and then it really does just get parked on a shelf and it doesn't live, doesn't evolve, and the organization doesn't really benefit from it other than it's a check mark. The board can now move on to the next project.
Right. So if you go back to either the ways in that we were talking about or just being sort of clear on the different aspects of the organization, you could sort of back into, okay, here are these aspects of our strategic plan. What do people have to think and do and feel in order for this to be successful, so that they will, realize Section 2B of the plan? And then how can board members help? So sure, you could bring that in as another discussion topic.
Yeah. Okay. Now we just have about 30 seconds left, Roger. I want you to share with me what you love about the work that you do.
Oh, all right. Well, I have to think about that for a nanosecond here. I think the top answer would be, because we work with so many nonprofits and they're in so many different fields, that first of all, it's never boring. And there's always an opportunity to help these different organizations achieve their different missions. We're all about brand building, not just to build the brand, but brand building to help organizations evolve and to better navigate change. And that's just about every nonprofit.
Roger Sametz, President and CEO, Sametz Blackstone Associates. They're at sametz.com, and he's at Sametz, Sametz, on Twitter. Roger, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.